Okay, well, let's get started. Aloha and welcome to our Hawaii Realtors Virtual Connect webinar. I'm Kelly Liberatore, the 2022 president of Hawaii Realtors. We have an exciting lineup of speakers to provide an overview of the sea level rise disclosure law change and the revised seller's real property disclosure statement. If you are experiencing any technical difficulties, please let us know in the chat box and staff will assist you. We will have a Q&A session after the presentations. If you have questions for the speakers, please submit them in the Q&A. Our first speakers are Danielle M.M. Bass and Justine Nihipali. They will be discussing the newly enacted sea level rise exposure area disclosure requirements. Ms. Bass is the State of Hawaii Sustainability Coordinator. She leads the newly founded statewide sustainability branch within the State Office of Planning and Sustainability Development. Justine Nihipali also works in our State Office of Planning and Sustainability Development. She is the Planning Program Manager of the Hawaii Coastal Zone Management Program. That program leads the coordinated implementation of the Hawaii Ocean Resource Management Plan and oversees the Special Management Area Permit System. Please welcome Danielle and Justine.
Hi, good morning. Thank you so much for the introduction. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm going to go ahead and begin sharing my screen, so one moment. Okay, can everyone see my screen? Wonderful. On a personal note, I just want to thank everyone. I want to thank the Hawaii Association of Realtors for this opportunity to present the overview of the state of Hawaii's sea level rise disclosure law. Personally, I wanted to share with you how much I appreciate realtors. I am one of the very few as a Kama'aina, Keikio'aina millennial here in Hawaii. Recently became a first home buyer this past, just a week ago. So we closed about a week ago and I couldn't have done it without my realtor. So I just very much appreciate all the hard work you do. And it's a pleasure to be here. So without further ado, I'd love to share this overview with y'all. Okay, so we're going to just briefly discuss the roles and responsibilities of the State of Hawaii's Office of Planning and Sustainable Development, Hawaii's climate change impacts, the history of Hawaii's sea level rise disclosure, the changes to the mandatory seller disclosures in real estate transaction law by Act 179, which was passed last year in 2021. And then we're going to transition into the planning for 3.2 feet of sea level rise. So I'd like to introduce you all to the Office of Planning and Sustainable Development. Kelly, I understand that's a mouthful. As the state sustainability coordinator, I try not to say that 3 times fast, so totally understand. Pretty much just going into it, we are still the Office of Planning. For those of you who are familiar with our office, our roles and responsibilities have changed. First and foremost, our name to become now the Office of Planning and Sustainable Development. We, of course, now report to and provide information not only to the governor, but the legislature, as well as state and county agencies. In terms of responsibilities, we've expanded Justine's area of coastal zone management. We'll now be working on sea level rise adaptation coordination, and this law kind of falls into that area. My branch, the statewide sustainability branch, will be working on climate adaptation issues and sustainability planning and coordination for the entire state and assisting the counties. I'm also mandated in my law to act in the law for the statewide sustainability program to assist the private sector as we transition to a more sustainable Hawaii. Finally, for those who may recall, there was the Office of Environmental Quality Control. That was now consolidated into the Office of Planning to become the Office of Planning and Sustainable Development. So what the legislature did over the last few years is pretty much kind of, retool our office so that we can expand, hit the ground running, work on climate change matters, and transition to a sustainable climate resilient Hawaii. So when we're talking about climate change, it's not an issue that's far off. We are seeing the impacts here now. In Hawaii, we are seeing our coral bleaching effect. We're seeing extreme drought, especially on our neighbor islands in Maui and in Big Island. We're seeing extreme flooding from severe storm impacts when you see those kind of Kona lows in the winter months, as well as we know that we have these hurricanes during the El Nino time and the summertime. So we've been seeing a lot of flooding. We've been seeing a lot of coastal erosion, especially there on that photo to our highways. And so we know as a state that we are facing this. This is happening now, and we need to begin the transition to adapt and become more resilient. So in terms of a history of Hawaii sea level rise disclosure, this is not very new. In 2017, the state of Hawaii published the Sea Level Rise Vulnerability and Adaptation Report. It incorporated models of passive flooding, shoreline erosion, and annual highway runoff with an estimate of 3.2 feet of sea level rise. They estimated in that report that about 20,000 residents throughout the state of Hawaii will be displaced, and 28 miles of coastline will become impassable with a 3.2 sea level rise. The subsequent year in 2018, the state's Climate Commission recommended legislation was needed for the disclosure of private property and public offerings located within areas of the potential exposure to sea level rise. In 2020, the Hawaii Association of Realtors proactively, without any state mandate, adopted the climate change and natural hazards in the disclosure section of the purchase contract. In 2021, just last year, the state then enacted amending the mandatory seller disclosure in real estate transaction law to include the state's designated sea level rise exposure area. This law that we're talking about here today will take effect in May 1st, 2022. So we're going to now go into the changes of the mandatory sellers in real estate transaction disclosure law by Act 179. Justine's going to go into the specific amendments. There's a photo of the copy of the law that the governor signed last year. So I'll pass it over to Justine.
Thanks, Danielle. This is Justine Nihipali. Thanks for the introduction. I am the State Program Manager for the Coastal Zone Management Program. As Kelly had mentioned in the introduction, our office, among a number of things, oversees the Special Management Area Permitting System, which is already on the disclosure. And so that's part of why we're here, is the sensitivity of the area on the coastline, how it affects the ocean, and also how the ocean affects property and land. I just wanted to take some time to discuss two particular amendments that Act 179 makes to the seller's disclosure for real estate transactions. This amendment, the first, provides a technical update and clarification to the disclosure requirement for identifying properties in the flood zone. You're probably already aware of these. I'm going to put, next slide, sorry. A few resources are on this slide that'll be useful to comply with the law. The first is the FAT, or the Flood Hazard Assessment Tool. The FAT is an online GIS mapping application developed by the DLNR Engineering Division for viewing FEMA's digital flood insurance rate maps, or DFIRMs. The informational web application allows public users to search and view an aggregate of data to assess flood risk for areas of interest. From that website, which is listed under web resources, you'll be able to access a video that provides an overview that walks you through the process of how to use the tool to identify information related to the property and the flood hazard area. I I've also put a little clip of the Vaihalana blog. The state also posts a lot of its information and updates on this site. And by accessing this website, you can subscribe to its updates for any new information related to floodplain management that might affect your clients and how it might affect your areas of interest. And then lastly, there are some contacts there down at the bottom that you may want to use should you have any questions or your sellers have any questions relating to their property and whether or not it falls within this requirement. So for questions related to the specific viewer, you can talk to the state NFIP coordinator, Carol Tiaubin. And then regarding like specific questions relating to the building standards that are applicable to the different flood zones, I would recommend that you contact the respective county floodplain manager that is also listed on this slide. Next slide. So the second amendment requires the mandatory seller disclosure for residential real property to identify properties within the sea level rise exposure area for the 3.2-foot scenario as designated by the state. This is the new addition to the seller's disclosure, which requires the seller to disclose whether the property is in question is located within the sea level rise exposure area. In 2017, as Danielle mentioned, the state released the State Sea Level Rise Adaptation Report as mandated by Act 83 during Session Laws of 2014. The viewer was developed as a companion to the report by the state with the University of Hawaii Sea Grant Program. Next slide. Thanks. This tool allows you to input the property location and the top bar into the tool and identify its relationship for progression of different sea level rise projections from 0.5 feet, 1.1, 2.0, and 3.2 feet. For purposes of complying with the law, which requires identification of whether it's in the sea level rise exposure area, we are using the 3.2-foot scenario. I won't go into this tool into particular detail because following this, Dr. Shelly Hable with UHC Grant will be providing more in-depth information related to the viewer and providing a walkthrough for how to use it to comply with the new requirement. But the links are available. I understand that you're going to be receiving handouts. So you'll be able to not only look at the viewer, but if you are particularly GIS savvy or if your client has a consultant that will be developing some information packets, you can download the specific layers from the Office of Planning's website as well at the geoportal.hawaii.gov. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I just want to thank you all as we close this presentation. That just as a friendly reminder, we're thinking, this is a very, scary discussion to think about sea level rise, to think about climate change and our future and our generation's future and the next generation's future. So I really just want to leave you all with this, that it's so important to prepare, and we can do so right now. We're all living here. We've all chose to live here in Hawaii, and because of our beautiful environment, because of our culture, because of the weather, because of the community here. And so let's work together to continue to protect it. Mahalo for this opportunity, for this presentation. Feel free to visit our website, planning.hawaii.gov. Thank you.
Thank you, Danielle and Justine. That was awesome. Our next speaker is Dr. Shelly Hable, who will describe how you may identify whether a property lies within a sea level rise exposure area and provide a demonstration of the Hawaii Sea Level Rise Viewer Mapping Tool. As an extension agent for the University of Hawaii Sea Grant College Program, Dr. Habel serves as the Coastal Lands Program Coordinator within the Department of Land and Natural Resources Office of Conservation and Coastal Lands. She is also part of the Hawaii Coastal Geology Group, which works with various government organizations to produce interactive inundation and erosion maps. Welcome, Shelly.
Thanks for that introduction. Here, let me share my screen. Okay, there we go. Did you guys see that? All good? Okay, awesome. Yeah, thank you. Thanks for that great introduction, and thank you to the association for allowing me the opportunity to present to you today. As part of this presentation, we're going to dig a little bit deeper into the sea level rise viewer and map information that it provides.
Oh, Shelly, could you please put it in presentation mode?
Okay, it should be in presentation mode. There might be a little bit of a delay.
Okay.
Is that better?
It's still showing all the slides.
How's that?
It might be on your separate monitor.
Okay, I'll stop share. Share screen again. How's that?
I think it's okay. Maybe if you could just zoom it, you may just zoom in a little bit.
Yeah, sorry about that. Okay, I'm not sure what's going on with that. Okay. So, okay, I'm going to present to you the report and viewer. So, the state DLNR, Hawaii Sea Grant, and other partners completed the Hawaii Sea Level Rise report and its companion Sea Level Rise viewer. And those were formally accepted by the State Climate Commission in December 2017. And the Sea Level Rise Viewer is a companion online mapping tool that serves as an interactive atlas for the sea level rise exposure data and other map layers from the Hawaii Sea Level Rise report. So the state report and viewer, through work with the University of Hawaii researchers, modeled and mapped 3 different types of flood impacts with sea level rise. The first model is passive flooding, which identifies areas that will be below sea level at high tide for a given sea level rise scenario. And so the example shown here shows high tide flooding exposure in the blue, and that's with 3.2 feet of sea level rise, and this is in the Mapunapuna area, which is near Honolulu Harbor. And then the picture on the right there shows actual flooding that occurs in this area currently with our highest tides. And so that water right there is actually brackish seawater and drainage water that flows up from the storm drains during high tide. And so just if you're curious, this picture here was taken at this intersection right here. So this is flooding that we're dealing with currently, which will get worse as sea level continues to rise. Okay, the second model is annual high wave flooding. And this model simulates high wave run-up over the shoreline during the typical highest wave event of the year on top of the projected sea level rise scenario. So the example shown here is simulated high tide flooding, that's the blue, along the highway in West Maui, that's Honopi'ilani Highway. And then the picture on the left shows actual wave run-up that's observed along this stretch of highway. And then the third sea level rise impact model in the Hawaii Sea Level Rise Viewer is coastal erosion. And so this model is based on measured rates of historical shoreline change combined with a numerical model of beach response to rising water levels. So that green line there is the present day vegetation line at Sunset Beach, Oahu. And then the orange line and red lines are the erosion hazard lines with 1.1 and 3.2 feet of sea level rise respectively. And then the inset photo, yep.
Oh, so sorry. I think the slides aren't progressing for screen share. Yeah, sorry.
Gosh.
There we go. Yes.
Is that better?
Yes, now it's on what you're talking about.
Okay, so back here, I'll just go over that real quick again so you guys can actually see what I was talking about. This is that passive flood model. And this is the Mapunapuna area. So this is the image. You guys can see that now? This is the image of flooding. And that's storm drain influenced flooding that's happening here at this intersection. So you guys can see that okay? Should be a flooding image at the top of the screen and then a flood map. And then here is that high wave run-up model with actual observed high wave run-up. And then this is the erosion model. And so in green again is that present day vegetation line at Sunset Beach on Oahu. The orange line is 1.1 feet of sea level rise, and the red line is 3.2 feet of sea level rise with erosion. Okay, and then this photo right here shows recent erosion damage to this bike path, which is located right here in the map. And that's at Sunset Beach Park. Okay. And right now you should be seeing like an overlay of the 3 different layers, right, to make a full sea level rise exposure area. Okay, so that's the sum of the 3 layers. So again, that represents the combined footprint of the passive flooding, the annual high wave flooding, and the coastal erosion models, right? So it's these 3 models: passive, high wave run up, and erosion. Okay, to make the sum of all 3. And so these areas of sea level rise exposure represent risk of chronic repeat flooding or land loss with increasing sea level rise. And just as a side note, the sea level rise exposure area for the islands of Molokai, Lanai, and the Big Island are based on the passive flood layer only. And so hopefully in the next few years, that research will be done to actually add the high wave and erosion model layers for those 3 islands. Okay. And this is an example of the combined Slorexa area with 3.2 feet of sea level rise for Kapa'a, Kauai.
Oh, I think you might have to click on the slides, Shelly. Sorry.
Jeez, okay. You see that?
It's still showing the Sunset Beach.
Okay, it might be my bandwidth, so I'll turn off my video. Is that better?
Seems to be a little stuck.
Okay. Well, I'm going to transition to a brief demonstration of how to use the viewer. So maybe that'll work a little bit better than my PowerPoint. Okay. So I'm going to switch over to that. Just give me 1 second. Okay, can you see my screen? It should be a screenshot of the Hawaii Sea Level Rise viewer.
It looks like it's queuing up. It may be your bandwidth. I can share my screen and maybe you can talk over it. That works better. It's just the sea level rise viewer.
It should be the sea.
Let me share my screen. And then you can let me know.
Perfect. All right, awesome. So I'll just guide you through what to click on.
Okay.
So first of all, a really good way to get to this site is either you can Google Hawaii Sea Level Rise Viewer, and it should pop right up as the first choice. So go ahead and try that.
Oh,
Yeah, and so viewers, you can either follow along with us or you can open this site up on your own and play around with it as we're talking. Okay, perfect. So that's one way to do it, just simply by Googling it. Otherwise, you can go ahead and enter in hawaiisealevelriseviewer.org, and that'll get you to the same exact webpage. Okay, so this is the home screen of the viewer. So it was developed by and exists on the Pacific Islands Ocean Observing Systems website of the University of Hawaii. And then let's see, I'll walk you through some of the main tools you'll want to know about to produce the maps you'll use for disclosures for real estate transactions. So first we're going to play with the zoom functionality. So right now it's zoomed all the way out. And so we're viewing the entire state of Hawaii. And so on the drop down menus on the top, yeah, right there, yep. So that'll get you to specific islands. Let's pick Kauai. All right, and then there's another drop down menu that appears just to its right. You can go ahead and click, choose Kapa'a. Okay, and so it'll zoom you right in there. And if you want to zoom in or out, additionally, you can use the little toggles to the, yep, right there, right to the upper left. So you can zoom in and out with that functionality there. And then if you want to go back to the statewide view, start over, maybe look at a different area, you can click on that home button to the left. Yep, there you go, zooms you right back out. And if you want to enter full screen or exit out of full screen, the button right below that with the arrows should enter into and out of full screen mode. Perfect. Okay, and I think an even better way of doing this for your needs is using that address search on the top. Okay, so using this, you can either enter in the 9-digit TMK that you're looking for, and that includes the county identification number at the very beginning. And so if you need more information on how to fill out that TMK, there's that I just to the right of the search. You see the I, you can roll over it. So if you just roll over it, if you go to the top and roll over it, it'll give you just a little bit of information on it. Perfect. Then if you actually click on it, it'll go down, give you more information on how to fill that out. Perfect. And then if you want to jump back up to the top, you can either scroll up or there's actually a button that says return to the top of the screen. Okay. And so, yeah, a lot of you might be used to like the kind of the grammar that goes into the TMK, right? The semicolons, the, you know, the different types of symbols that go in there, but you want to leave that out of the search because if you use any kind of colons, it'll give you back an error. And so just enter in a regular TMK. So we can start by entering in, I'll just give you an example. Let's enter in 135,004,001. And then hit search. Okay, yep. And so that pops up a window where you can zoom. You can click zoom here. It'll actually zoom. And you can keep zooming, keep hitting the zoom here button, and it'll zoom in as much as you want. And then, oh, if you zoomed in too much, you can use the functionality on the upper left-hand side of the screen to zoom out if you want. Perfect. And then another thing you could do instead of using a TMK is to actually enter in an address. And so let's enter in 59-337 Nui Road. Okay, perfect. Yep. And that's Ehukai Beach Park. And so it just requires a physical street address and a road name. And same thing, you can zoom in and next we'll look at the actual tools that are provided in the legend on the right. And so first, let's go up to base maps at the very, very top. Yep, there you go. And so the default is grayscale, but if you'd rather, you can actually use satellite imagery. And so try that, click on satellite imagery, boom, awesome. So now you have satellite imagery for your mapping, which you might prefer. And then below that is the actual sea level rise exposure area data. So go ahead and click on 3.2. Yep, there you go. Boom, you got your 3.2 foot Slerexa for that area. And just below that are the passive flooding, annual highway flooding, and coastal erosion layers. You don't need to click on them, but that's just if you want to dig a little bit deeper into the data behind the sea level rise exposure area, you can use those if you're interested or your buyers and sellers are interested in that information. Okay, and also available if you go down on the right-hand side of the screen to other overlays. Yep, there you go. There's some more helpful layers. And if you click on TMK Parcels, it's almost, yep, there you go. That will show you the boundaries of your TMKs, which is helpful for preliminarily kind of identifying those boundaries for the property you're looking at. But just be careful, like when you're using this layer, it's a little bit offset. This layer was produced outside, it originated from outside the Slerexa viewer and layers. Okay, it was designed by a different agency. And so there is that slight offset. So if you've used the various county real property websites, you probably noticed this offset in their mapping tools too. It's an issue with the TMK layer itself. So use a specific TMK layer with caution, but again, it's useful for just preliminarily identifying the chosen property. Okay, so once you get there, you'll probably want to either print this or save an electronic copy of the map. There's a couple of different ways you can do this. You can right click, go ahead and right click and go down to save image. And so that's going to open up explanations for all different ways to save your screenshot. Also, an easier way, if you click out of that, just X out of that, and you just hover over the legend, right click, and this go down to print. There you go, perfect. Okay, up will pop your map. So it's loading its preview, but up will pop that map along with all the descriptions that go along with this mapping tool. So that's like 17 pages of description. So you can either print that out and save it, or you can limit it so it only prints or saves that one page. And so you can, yep, just click custom, change it to first page, and that will just save that single page. Perfect. Or you could just print the screen using that function if you're more comfortable with that. Okay, so you can X out of that. So down below the viewer, if you want to dive deeper into the sea level rise information, there's an overview of the state sea level rise report and science behind that. And then there's some information on the sea level rise modeling, talking about the different scenarios and information about the timing of these different scenarios. If you, yep, just keep scrolling down. And those are from peer-reviewed sources. And then as you go further down, there's information on each of the data layers in the viewer, including the Slerexa and its constituent mapping layers, including passive, flooding, annual highway flooding, and coastal erosion. So there's a number of other layers included in the viewer, and we don't really have time to cover all of those, but I'll just mention briefly that if you'd like to review other vulnerability layers, they exist here also with associated information regarding what they represent and how they were produced. So if you go back up to the top, you can just click that. There's a bunch of buttons that just say back to the top. Perfect. Okay, so if you scroll down a little bit, you can get the contact information. Scroll. There it is. Yep. So below that gray box is the contact. All right, so if you need technical support, there's that email address there. That's slviewer@hawaii.edu, which bounces directly to my colleague, Dr. Brad Romine. He is the sea level rise exposure area guru, and he couldn't be here today, unfortunately, so I am acting in his stead, but he's very quick to respond if you have further questions. And with that, I'm finished with my presentation, so we can move forward, and I'm glad to try and answer any questions you might have at the end of today's webinar. And sorry again about all the technical difficulties today. I think Kelly, you might be on mute.
Thank you. So next up is Dusty Woodstock, the BIC of Harita Realty. She's the chair of the Hawaii Realtors Standard Forms Committee. She has served on the Standard Forms Committee for 9 years and will be discussing the changes to the seller's real property disclosure statement. Welcome, Dusty.
Thank you, Kelly. And thank you everyone for being here. This is a very important topic and we've had some wonderful speakers today. The Standard Forms Committee, as soon as there is a law, we get together and we have special meetings and we have our regular standard meetings. And we got together with regard to this law on July 8th of last year. So let's look at the seller's real property disclosure statement and see the changes that we have made, which will become effective in the May release. So the first part is the box. And as you all know, that is the portion that you as a realtor fill out. So the first change we made to the seller's real property disclosure is down where it says flood zone designations. And so that is a very important change. And next to it is sea level rise exposure area. We have a yes or a no. So you will go into the map and you will follow the instructions and you will then know how to fill that out. Okay, next we go to page 2 of the seller's real property disclosure. And the changes that we made are on question number 12. And this is A12. So it says, is the property located in a special flood hazard area? And we added, as officially designated on flood maps promulgated by the National Flood Insurance Program of the Federal Emergency Management Agency for the purposes of determining eligibility for emergency flood insurance programs. So now you will go on to that website and you will look at the federal information guide there. So then you go down to 13 and we added, does the property lie within the sea level rise exposure area designated by the Hawaii Climate Change Mitigation and Adaptation Commission? So this is where you will help your clients explain that. You will show them where to go, and then you will be able to properly answer that. You will help your client properly answer that. And then we continue down to number 17, and it says, are there any written agreements concerning items 14, 15, and 16? So remember, it's important for you to set aside an hour and a half, 2 hours to go through the seller's real property disclosure with your client. These are laws that will need to be followed, and you need to help your clients. So that's what I have to say today about the seller's real property disclosure and all the changes we made that will come into effect May 1st. Thank you.
Thank you, Dusty. Thank you, Dusty. We're going to go into the Q&A session. We will now have answer questions from the audience. Please remember to submit your questions to the Q&A box instead of the chat box. And then Ethel will read the questions to the speakers.
Okay, first question. Do we only have to provide this report and access to the tool if they're within the 3.2 feet or for all sales?
I would say you're going to have to answer the question. So you're going to have to look at it for all sales, all properties.
Thank you, Dusty. Next question, 3.2 feet by when? Hawaii County's 2018 general plan calls for up to 3 feet by 2100. However, the science has changed massively since then. For example, many news outlets have recently reported that the next 1 foot of SLR will happen in the next 30 years.
Take that. So I'd encourage the individual who has those specific questions to go ahead, and if you really want to, read the Sea Level Rise Adaptation Report. It's a big one. It's available online. It was published in 2017 by the state of Hawaii, specifically the Hawaii Mitigation and Adaptation Climate Change Commission. And so that report has adopted multiple scenarios with the high end of 3.2 feet. That is why we're strongly recommending as the state to plan for 3.2 feet. We do understand that the climate science, the models, as well as the data corresponding to other climate issues are changing more rapidly. And so that is why, from a planning perspective, agencies like mine, for instance, I just published the State Sustainability and Climate Plan, Strategic Plan, and we are recommending that that sea level rise report be updated so that it's current, using current data. So that is the goal. But I would probably just remind you that yes, the Kauai County General Plan, which was published in 2018, there was a little bit of an overlap, if you will, right? So the state report was published in December 2017. So I think it's just one of those times where there's just a little bit of overlap. But yes, we'd like you to reference the state sea level rise report, the state sea level rise viewer. We're strongly recommending to plan for 3.2 feet. And the report is actually recommending that 3.2 feet is looking like mid-century or 2060 to begin. Thank you.
By how much is the sea level rising per year for the state of Hawaii? And you mentioned the report. This person is asking, has there been a study?
Yes, so what I'll go ahead and do is I'll drop the reports link in the chat. And in terms of the the current rising, I would like to have Shelly. I think that's more in her wheelhouse if she would like to share.
Yeah, thank you, Danielle. No, that's a really good question. And so if you look at the Honolulu tide gauge, you can actually see the rate that's been calculated at that specific tide gauge locally. And so if you draw a line linearly, then yeah, like you'll see that if sea level rise follows a linear path, then it doesn't reach that 3.2 feet of sea level rise by 2100. But in satellite altimetry data, they're seeing that sea level rise isn't following that linear path. It's actually accelerating. So I'm not sure if you remember back to your like algebra 2 or calculus classes, if you actually add that multiple to your rise, it creates a change in rate. And so that rate isn't linear, it's curved, right? It's turning exponential. And so that's why you're seeing that expected rate being higher than that linear rate. So we are actually seeing that linear rate, not there. It's curved, if that makes sense. Let me know if that doesn't answer your question.
Okay, next question. This is for Dusty. For the seller's real property disclosure statement, is it possible to include the website for number 12 and 13?
That's a very good question. We on the sellers, the property disclosure and the standard forms committee recently talked about having links in our forms, and we have decided that we have a new policy and we will not include any links. And the reason is they go dead, they change. And so we've even got a dead one right now in the purchase contract. So we are no longer going to include links. So you need to have your links available and know your links that are presently working in order to help your clients.
Thank you, Dusty. More questions for you. Do these disclosures affect what will be shown in the MLS listing info at some point?
I'm not sure what that question is, but can you, I don't understand it. What?
Okay, we'll reach out to that individual to
Okay.
get clarification.
Okay.
Another one for the SRPDS, did the first page change to be completed by seller only?
The first page has a box, and that box is to be completed by the realtor. That has never changed. That's the way it is. Now, it does state that it has to be completed by seller only, and that means pen to paper or however they're going to do it. But you as a realtor should be sitting next to them or on the phone with them and spending a good hour and a half helping them because they need help to fill out this. This is not an easy form to fill out. They need help.
Another one, should we begin using the new form now or wait until May 2022?
This form has not come out yet. It has not been released. So it is a sample form for you to look at, but it will be in effect May 1st. Now, if you are presently listing properties, it would be a good idea for you to start doing this. Yes, but it isn't on the form yet, not until the May release.
Dusty, you mentioned going into the flood map tools. The question is, it says this section is for the client to fill out. If we are assisting them with this particular question, shouldn't we just place this in the box so we can fill this out?
I've already said the links sometimes change, they go dead. So we're not doing that. So it is important for your principal broker or your broker in charge to make sure that all of the agents have these links so they can help their clients.
Thank you, Dusty. Let's see, another question. The amendment of HRS 508D-15.5 does not state 3.2 feet for the computation of the sea level rise exposure area. But the website shows 4 scenarios, 0.5, 1.1, 2.0, 3.2. Can we just disclose based on 3.2 feet?
I'll take that one. So yes, you're absolutely right. The amendment does refer to what's adopted by the state of Hawaii's Climate Commission. And so that's the sea level rise report that we've been discussing, as well as the viewer that Shelly presented. So because that report was published in 2017, because that viewer is published, we're recommending to plan for the 3.2. You are correct. There are 4 scenarios, but it's always best to plan for the highest, the 3.2 here. So It does, yes. Thank you, Jason, for bringing up the law. So areas that are susceptible to sea level rise impacts based on 3.2 feet in the sea level projected to occur mid-century or earlier. So that was referenced in the preamble of the law. It's not codified in statute. So the intent of this law is to do the proactive thing, and we are strongly recommending to plan for and prepare for 3.2 until a new publication, until the State Climate Commission adopts another sea level exposure area.
Thank you, Danielle. Another question, how does the king tides affect these charts?
That's a great question for Shelly. I know they've done a lot of work on king tides.
Oh, that's a really good question. So these maps represent a certain flood exposure with mean high or high water. And so that represents the average highest tide of the day locally. Okay, so your king tides are the extreme tides that go way above your mean high or high water, right? And so if you look into the future, 3.2 feet, and it's on top of that is a mean high or high water, you can expect that when we reach that 3.2 feet and a king tide happens, that flooding will be worse.
Thank you. Next question. What is the difference between the sea level rise exposure area? A, passive flooding. B, annual high wave flooding. C, coastal erosion.
Shelly, if you don't mind, I'd like to bring back Justine and have her respond to that. And feel free to add on to Justine's response. Thank you.
Sure. So the sea level rise exposure area is an aggregate of 3 different data layers that you've mentioned in your question. Dr. Hable can absolutely expand upon that. But it is a compilation of the different types of hazards aggregated into one exposure area, except for Molokai and Big Island, which only have the passive flooding layers, which is just based on the type of data that is available for the different geologies of Molokai and Big Island, as well as kind of the availability of the science and data for those 2 geographic areas. Shelly, just correct me if I'm wrong, but what we are recommending is the exposure area, which is that aggregate, to be utilized in this disclosure.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And for more information on how each layer was actually modeled, you can go to the sea level rise viewer, and in that information at the bottom that we were showing you, there are explanations of that. And if you want even more information, you can go to the sea level rise report itself. Like, I can explain each different model right now, but it might take up a little bit too much time. But if you have specific questions about it, please feel free to reach out to me or Dr. Brad Romine. And there's that link on that sea level on the viewer.
Thank you, Shelly. Another question for you. Who is maintaining the sea level rise web tools to ensure that they don't go dead or inoperable, as we realtors will be dependent on them?
I'll take that one. It's so PAC-IU is hosting it. So it's the Pacific Islands Ocean Observing System with University of Hawaii. And it's my understanding it's a very stable site, so it can be counted on.
Thank you, Shelly. This question is for Dusty. For the SRPDS, is it effective as of 5/1, which you already said it is effective as of 5/1? Is it effective as of 5/1 sale closing date, 5/1 purchase contract acceptance date, 5/1 SRPDS completion date, or another day?
That's a good question. I would think that any property that comes on the market as of May 1st, that's the law. Any property that comes on the market. If you're in escrow, well, if you have properties right now on the market that aren't in escrow, which is rare, or some that are in escrow, I would run this website right now and pass it on to your clients. That's what I would do.
Thank you, Justine. This next question is for Jason.
Hold on. Sorry, Ethel. I just wanted
Sure.
to add on to that is, you know, the Hawaii Association of Realtors has already, you folks have already been pretty proactive here on this, right? So even before the law was adopted, there was that paragraph included in the purchase contract. So, you know, this idea, yes, this is effective on May 1st, but I think that the real leadership is here with this group, since they've actually started taking the lead before this law was adopted last year. So I thank you, Dusty, for saying, you know, to talk about that leadership. And I really just want to highlight the leadership that this group has been taking. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Danielle. Okay, this next question is for Jason. Are we legally able to help the seller to fill out this form? SRPDS.
Excuse me. Yes, you are. It's just this. It's ultimately the seller's responsibility to complete the form.
Can you repeat that, Jason?
Sure. Sorry, I was clearing my throat. Sorry about that. Yes, you may help the seller complete the form, but technically you're not required to. Ultimately, the responsibility rests on the seller. So obviously, most sellers won't know how to do it, which is why it's so important that I think that you do, so that you can help them.
Thank you, Jason. Next question. If you are a seller living in a sea level rise area and you are selling your home, you are strongly recommending disclosing to buyers that the property is subject to a 3.2 feet that adversely impacts a property. Is this a fact or is this an estimate? This strong recommendation will negatively impact sellers, so it's important that we disclose accurate information.
So I can take that too. The law requires, as of May 1st of this year, that all sellers of residential real property in Hawaii disclose whether their property lies within a sea level rise exposure area, and then gives the commission the authority to define what a sea level rise exposure area is. My understanding is that the regulator, Justine, I believe, has a definition of 3.2 feet, and that's why we recommend that you follow the commission's definition, but I don't want to speak for Justine or the commission, so I'll stand back.
Yes, to clarify, the commission has recommended 3.2 feet as the highest scenario at this point in time, pursuant to the publication of the Sea Level Rise Report published in December 2017 and the corresponding Sea Level Rise Viewer. Justine, do you have anything to add to that, or did that clear it up?
Thank you, Danielle. Next question. Specifically for complying with the legal disclosure requirements, if the property is in a lower sea level rise exposure area, such as 0.5, 1.1, or 2.0, would we still need to mark yes? Or is there only a disclosure requirement if the property is in the 3.2 exposure area?
So as Jason mentioned, right, this law is discussing what is based on the Climate Commission's adoptions. So the Climate Commission has adopted these 4 scenarios. And so, yes, if there is a need to disclose, that is the mandate provided by this law. Does that make sense?
Thank you, Danielle. Next question, what happens to building setback as we experience sea level rise?
So you're probably speaking about the shoreline setback rules that are administered by the county. The Kauai County and Maui County have shoreline setback rules that are based on erosion rates. based on historical erosion rates. And the city and county and the Big Island utilize the the setbacks that are established by a minimum of state law at the moment, which is now 40 feet, subject to Act 16 of legislative law in state legislative session in 2020. So that is not necessarily tied specifically to the sea level rise disclosure, but they have their own rules and ordinances relating to the shoreline setback based on the county. So it's best that you contact the county planning department.
Thank you, Justine. Let's answer 2 more questions and then we'll be ending the session. The next question, should listing agents attach the maps from the various websites to the SRPDS?
I think that would be a very good idea to attach the maps. Yes.
Thank you, Dusty. Final question. If you are already in escrow on May 1st, will seller need to revise or amend on May 1st if already submitted?
It's a law, so I would say yes. Always err on the side of being right, doing the right thing. So yes, it would be an amended disclosure. That's what it has to be. As of May 1st, it's the law.
Thank you, Dusty. Well, that's wrapping up for the questions. Just a reminder, you'll be getting the recording so you can see the demo on how to print once again. And now back to you, Kelly.
You're on mute.
Unmuting. Yeah, just unmuted. Thank you. So thank you, everyone. And mahalo to our speakers for the informative presentations and helping us understand this new law. We also appreciate all the attendees for coming to learn about this topic. Thank you.